Welcome back, folks, to another Archetype review. I'm Frizz, and today we're going to be covering the Dragon Disciple archetype from the Advanced Player's Guide. Dragon Disciples are all about dragons, though you probably guessed that from the name already. They either venerate dragons, or despise them with a burning passion, and then fight fire with fire. Either way, a Dragon Disciple gets draconic abilities that they can use to wreak havoc. It's a very, very fun archetype because it's, dealing with dragons, and while some of its abilities aren't mechanically powerful, no option that makes you more like a dragon is a bad thing. Over the course of a Dragon Disciple's life, their body will slowly change to become more and more draconic, and it's really badass. Let's just jump right into things, shall we? Normally I end up saying that the dedication for most archetypes is simple, but unfortunately that isn't really the case here, since the Dragon Disciple dedication is uncommon, so there's more stuff to go over. It's normally only available to kobolds with the dragon-scaled or spell-scaled heritages, dragon instinct barbarians, or draconic sorcerers. But as with all uncommon options, your GM can give you access to this dedication even if you don't fill those prerequisites if it makes sense. I'm also just going to point out that I feel that Worm-blessed sorcerers should be able to grab this archetype, but since the Belonging Expanse book released after the Advanced Player Guide, technically, rules as written, it doesn't work. It makes complete sense if your backstory heavily involves dragons, that you would have access to this archetype, so just ask your GM, they might be willing to let you have this. Whenever you take this dedication, you now have to choose a particular type of dragon. There are a ton of them, and each one is associated with an energy type. You get resistance to that energy type equal to half your level, and you also get a nice +1 bonus on saving throws against sleep effects and effects that would make you paralyzed, since dragons are normally resistant to those kind of effects. Sleep effects are incredibly uncommon, but resisting being paralyzed is amazing, because you never want to be paralyzed. Just to go over the dragon types really quick, let's just go over all of them and their damage types really fast. Black, Brine, and Copper dragons are acid-based, while Blue, Bronze, Cloud, and Sky dragons are associated with electricity. Brass, Gold, Magma, Red, and Underworld dragons are related to fire, while Crystal and Forest are related to piercing. Green dragons are poisonous, while Sea dragons give resistance to bludgeoning damage. Silver and White dragons are resistant to cold, Sovereign dragons resist mental damage, and Umbral dragons resist negative damage. All of these stand out as good, and you will likely run into them throughout the course of the campaign. But I am just going to point out that fire, piercing, and bludgeoning are the damage types that you're most likely to run into and to take throughout the course of a campaign. Also, negative resistance is fantastic in campaigns with a lot of undead and or necromancers. Claws of the Dragon turns your fingernails into claws, and it's rather good claws at that. They're agile and finesse unarmed attacks that deal 1d6 slashing damage. Also, if you're a draconic sorcerer and then whenever you cast Dragon Claws, which is your focus spell, the spell's damage increases to d6s and the resistance to damage improves by 5, which is really good because that's a lot of resistance to be able to get at like level 4. Overall, for non-draconic sorcerers, it's alright, but the interesting thing is it's not actually that good for monks, which is generally a class that's fantastic with unarmed attacks, and it's also not great for dragon instinct barbarians. Monks already have a 1d6 unarmed attack due to the powerful fist class feature, and barbarians generally want to avoid agile weapons since they don't benefit from rage as much. If you want to play a melee sorcerer, then this can be helpful, but playing a melee sorcerer is incredibly dangerous, so yeah. This feat is great though for getting a backup weapon. That's the main appeal of it in my mind. You generally aren't going to be better with your now new claws than you are going to be with a weapon, but it's rather hard to disarm you of your claws. Draconic Scent is actually incredibly useful. It gives you an imprecise scent sense with a range of 30 feet. That range can generally be increased or decreased depending on the direction of the wind, but most GMs don't have the wind accounted for in a combat, so most of the time it's safe to just roll with a 30-foot range. This makes your life so much easier whenever you're dealing with invisible or stealthy enemies, since most creatures don't take precautions to reduce how much they smell. Although if you're fighting something incorporeal, then it won't help you there because they don't actually have a body to smell. Whenever you're finding a creature with an imprecise sense, in case you didn't know, you automatically can find which square they're in, but they will still be hidden. That's the main drawback of using an imprecise sense to find them, since you can't actually make them any better than hidden. But it is fantastic for being able to tell, okay, that person is in that square. And then you can use a seek action to try and find them a bit better, but it's up to you whether or not you really feel like you need to do that. This makes finding enemies so much easier, and it can really help out your party, since you can guarantee to know what square they're in. The Dragon Arcana feat is kind of weird, and I honestly don't know what kind of character it would be explicitly targeted towards. You can only take it if you can cast spells from spell slots, and then you add the Draconic Bloodline's granted spells to your spell list. You still have to learn them like normal, but the weird thing to me is that most spellcasting Dragon Disciples are going to be the Draconic Sorcerers, meaning that this feat does absolutely nothing for them since they already have them available. In case you aren't a Draconic Sorcerer, which means that you are almost certainly a Dragon-scaled or Spell-scaled Kobold, then these spells are alright, but they're not particularly meant for, arcane casters, since most of these spells are already arcane. Divine and Primal will probably get the most out of this feat, since most of the spells are arcane or occult, so you'll get access to more spells if you're a Divine or Primal caster. While I won't be going over all of the spells individually, I will just quickly say that all of these spells are legitimately great, and you cannot go wrong by getting access to these. They are very, very fun spells. Where Claws of the Dragon is an offensive boost, Scales of the Dragon is an explicitly defensive boost. You grow scales across your body, which protect you from both physical harm and boost your resistance to damage further. Whenever you're unarmored, you get a +2 status bonus to your AC, though your dexterity cap is now +2. Additionally, your resistance to damage from the Dragon Disciple dedication increases by 3, so it's now 3 plus half your level. This is generally pretty good, since spellcasters, who are going to be unarmored most of the time, can really use a +2 status bonus to their AC. Just generally, a +2, if you can make use of it, is amazing. I'm also going to point out that a Kobold Monk, using the Mountain Stance feats to get a bonus to their AC, and then who also use Scales of the Dragon, get the highest possible AC of any character in the entire game. So if that's your particular jam, then you can make an incredibly tanky character with Scales of the Dragon. The boost to your resistance is always going to be good as well, especially if you have a common damage type as your resistance. Breath of the Dragon is probably the point where it'll actually feel like you're getting Draconic. You get access to the Dragon Breath focus spell, which is normally a Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer focus spell. It costs a single focus point and then 2 actions. And also, if you don't already have a focus pool, you get a focus point, and if you already have one, then you increase the number of focus points you have to a maximum of 3. The damage type and the area of the spell are based on whichever dragon you chose whenever you took the Dragon Disciple dedication, dealing whichever damage type that you got resistance to. Depending on the dragon, it will either be a 30-foot cone, a 60-foot line, or a 10-foot burst within 30 feet. All of these are generally pretty good, and you can really catch a lot of people. This damage will only be slightly lower than a fireball, like 1d6 lower if I'm correct, which is really sick considering that it only costs a single focus point. There is an ambiguous part of this feat, though, that you will need to ask your GM about. Normally, this is an arcane focus spell for sorcerers, but this archetype doesn't actually make you trained in arcane spell DCs. So if you're going rules as written, I'm pretty sure that your DC is just going to be 10 plus your charisma modifier, which is so low that by level 8, nothing is going to be failing that reflex save, meaning that this is really, really bad. My personal ruling is that you would be able to use your class DC or arcane spell DC if you already have it, or just a spell DC if you have it, so that way that this feat can actually get a decent amount of use. Also, for a Draconic Sorcerer, you can get access to this at level 6 by taking the Advanced Bloodline feat, so you should just take that then if you want to take this. There's no need to use a level 8 class feat to get this when you can just use level 6 class feat. Unless, there's a different level 6 feat that you want, and you don't want one of the level 8 feats. Similar to Breath of the Dragon, Wings of the Dragon gives you an incredible flight speed for 1 minute by giving you a Draconic Sorcerer focus spell. Wings of the Dragon allows you to get a fly speed of 60 feet for 1 minute, which is incredibly good, and it gets even better once it heightens to level 8, where the duration becomes 10 minutes. This is legitimately amazing, and especially since it's just a single action spell. Again, a Draconic Sorcerer can get this at level 10, so you should just take it then. Shape of the Dragon is where you can literally get the ability to fight dragons with the dragon. The Dragon Form spell is a battle form polymorph spell, and you can really wreck some stuff up with it. You get access to a single 7th level dragon form once per day, but the spell automatically heightens to 8th level once you hit 16th level, and 9th level once you hit level 18. Also, you get the additional effect of anytime that you critically hit with an unarmed strike that you get from your dragon form, you immediately get your breath weapon back that you get from the spell. This does raise a little bit of a weird point though, the whole breath weapon thing, since the DC that you use for your breath weapon is your spell DC. But if you are not a spellcaster, then you don't have a spell DC, because this archetype doesn't give you a spell DC. This is very similar to the Breath of the Dragon feat, where you could just not have one. In that case, I recommend just using your class DC. It's generally just going to be for 1 fight a day, so it's not going to be terribly broken, and you're turning into a dragon, of course it's going to be pretty strong. For society play, then unfortunately you're going to be a bit out of luck though, but really it's between not being able to really use the feat at all because it'll be such a low DC that everything will automatically critically succeed at this level, or having a breath weapon that's scary. Either way, I feel like you should probably just go for the one that makes it scary because it's a dragon. I'm also not going to be going over every single type of dragon form that you can get from this spell, since there are a ton and they are all slightly different, but I will be pointing out that if you chose a type of dragon that was introduced after the Advanced Player's Guide, which generally means that it's from the Milwaukee Expanse book, then Dragon 4 might not actually allow you to even use it. This feat does dictate that you can only take the form of dragon that you chose with the dedication, meaning that if, say, you are a cloud dragon or a sky dragon or an underworld dragon, that doesn't technically exist in dragon form. So you can't take that form, so technically you can't really cast the spell. Now this is pretty easily rectified by just asking your GM to pick one of these that is pretty appropriate and saying that that is the form that you take, and that's the stats that you get, or to just homebrew it up themselves. But generally, it is a little bit weird, because more dragon types are getting added all the time, but this spell was released a long time ago, so generally it doesn't have a lot of future-proofing in it. But it's very easy to rectify. If you are able to use this feat to its full effectiveness, though, you can be an absolute monster. These spells are generally meant for spellcasters to cast on themselves, not for marshals to have. So, a marshal being able to turn into a dragon means that you can really wreck some face, considering that you can now use your unarmed proficiency rather than the spell's bonus. So you can get some much higher bonuses on these attack rolls than a spellcaster probably could. Also, I'm just going to point out that it's weird, that it specifically points out that this heightens to 9th level, despite there being no heighten effect for dragon form being heightened to 9th level. There is one for being heightened to 8th level, but not for 9th. It's a little weird to me, but at least it's harder to dispel, I guess. The Disciple's Breath feat basically just gives you a normal breath weapon, like not just a focus spell breath weapon, but just a breath weapon. You have to have the Dragon's Breath focus spell, which means you have to have Breath of the Dragon feat, but now you can spend 2 actions to use Dragon Breath without using a focus point. It's the actual focus spell, but the damage is capped at 9d6 damage, but it doesn't cost a focus point. You do have the limitation, like a normal dragon, of not being able to use it again for 1d4 rounds, but it's really great for fights with a lot of enemies. Because those enemies are going to be lower level, not dealing quite as much damage isn't nearly as big of a deal, and a lot of martials have a bit of a problem with dealing damage over a huge area, so being able to do that is sometimes going to be very, very useful. Plus, who doesn't want the ability to breathe fire or acid or, any type of damage type almost at will? It's just a really, really cool ability. I hope that you remember the Shape of the Dragon feat, considering that we went over it like a minute or two ago. But Mighty Dragon Shape requires that you have Shape of the Dragon. But it is very simple, thankfully, since Dragon Shape is fairly complicated. Rather than having a single dragon form spell that you can cast every day, you can now instead cast it once an hour. This makes it so much easier to use the spell without having to worry about wasting it, and it's also cool as hell, which is a huge bonus. It allows you to be a huge kick-ass dragon way more often, which is fun for a huge variety of reasons. Who doesn't want to be a dragon more often? Probably everyone who takes this archetype, because that's probably the goal, is to just be a dragon. Overall, I feel like this archetype has an incredibly solid flavor foundation, and is a ton of fun because you're trying to emulate the abilities of dragons. But trying to emulate the ability of dragons is actually a little bit of a mechanical issue, because dragons are basically good at everything. Dragons are good spellcasters, and they're also complete monsters in just a straight-up fight. So that means that if you're trying to emulate them, the feats that give you those abilities are generally going to be split down the line of some being martial, some being spellcasting, and it means that this archetype is a little bit split. Some of the feats aren't that useful for martial characters, some aren't that useful for spellcasters, which means that some feats just straight up aren't going to be nearly as good for spellcasters or for martials. So it really kind of splits it. Basically, you have to pick and choose what you want, since some feats aren't going to be very helpful on certain character types. When it comes down to it though, what I just talked about is how viable each feat is mechanically, but the value of turning your character slowly over time into a dragon is priceless. Also, this archetype gives you an incredible incentive for storytelling, which I love. It basically bakes a story into your character. Why does this character love dragons so much that they want to be a dragon? Or why does this character hate dragons so much, and yet still decide to take on some of the abilities of dragons to try and destroy dragonkind? It's such an interesting story that's baked directly into the archetype that I really enjoy. A lot of archetypes are fairly general. It's just, here is something or a profession or just a particular skill that your character is going to be better at, but it doesn't really bake a story directly into it. Dragon Disciple does, and I love it. Thanks for watching. I hope that the holidays coming up go really well for you, for the ones that you celebrate, of course, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. Talking about dragons is always fun, and Dragon Disciple is a bit of a weird archetype due to how emulating dragons means emulating both physical and magical abilities, so it's a little all over the place. I hope that I did the archetype justice, and I hope that you're able to learn something and maybe get a character idea in your mind. If you've got any questions or corrections for me, then list them down below and I'll do my best to answer anything that you have. While your decisions are your own, I'd appreciate it if you liked the video or subscribed, as that really does help me out. Until I see you next, live a wonderful life.